at the opening, and we had a real good introduction into why forests are needed and why forest finance is needed. So we're going to look at the next step here, forest finance. So we're meeting at a moment when the entire forest finance architecture is changing, and still, in spite of many years of efforts, we don't see much happening on the ground. We see basically that forests get 1% of the finance that they should be getting, and but they offer 20% of global mitigation. And talking a little bit about a little different thing, which is restoration. If you have seen the land gap report, which came out 2 days ago by our friends at the University of Melbourne and partners, it sums up all the pledges that countries collectively do to say we want to restore all that land. It's 1 billion hectares. It's more land than actually is available for this. So we know that pledges are fantasy. They need to be bolstered by actual action plans, roadmaps, as Minister said. And this is maybe a chance for us to discuss this a little bit. For more than a decade, REDD Plus has been a flagship mechanism for tropical forest finance, but today we're seeing a lot of different mechanisms coming up, carbon markets, the TFFF. The problem with things like REDD Plus and carbon markets is they are results-based and results-based payments. And we have a 2030 zero deforestation goal. It's maybe not really realistic anymore, but it's still a goal. And so once we have achieved this goal, these mechanisms will have a problem because they cannot pay for results because everything has been done already. So this is maybe the hour for the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever facility, launched now here at the COP and before it even started, and already 5.5 billion of finance have been pledged for it. Again, pledges are not the real thing, but it's a start, and particularly the TFFF needs to start with strong pledges. So the central question for us today is quite straightforward. Across public finance, carbon markets, new mechanisms, what are the real measurable changes that we see on the ground? What's working, what isn't, and what needs to change? So to answer that question, we have aligned a few eminent experts on the subject. We start with my colleague Beria Lemona. She's the team leader for climate change in C4ICRAF with a keynote presentation. Then we have 2 recorded messages. Actually, we start with Ludwig, no? We start with 1 recorded message, then Lemona, and then we have Ludwig Liagre who is going to talk first. He's also C4ICRAF working in our Luxembourg outfit. And we have then Lemona, and then we have Bart Haastad, who's from Stanford University, also with a recorded message. For panel members, we have Dirk Nemitz, who is the team leader for AFLU at the UNFCCC, old friend of ours. And we had 2 more names, Sara Ferrer Olivella from UNDP and Andre Rodriguez Aquino from TFF's Secretariat. They couldn't make it. We have instead our dear friend and colleague, Dr. Professor Daniel Murias, who is also the president of the Indonesian Academy of Science. So let's jump into it. Vani, the talk for Ludwig, by Ludwig, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to join this session here at the Forest Pavilion. Today, I would like to focus my intervention on domestic funds and their potential for financing forests. This topic is particularly important and unfortunately often overlooked in major international debates on forest finance. As a matter of fact, domestic and local financing solutions play a central role in ensuring that resources are effectively used on the ground through mechanisms that countries already manage and understand well. Today, I will mostly discuss the concept of national forest funds, which exist in many countries. I will also touch on other domestic instruments, such as conservation trust funds, national biodiversity funds. We will look also at key principles that support strong domestic capitalization, as well as emerging international opportunities, including links with REDD+ and the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, the TFFF. Finally, I will close with some reflections on the future role of these domestic funds, including to foster landscape approaches. National forest funds are mechanisms dedicated to financing forest conservation, sustainable forest management, and forest restoration. They are usually extra-budgetary, meaning they are not limited to a single public budget cycle. They can take different legal forms, but they are generally closely aligned and linked to national forest policies to support the implementation of key forest priorities. According to FAO estimates, there are over 70 national forest funds worldwide operational, so really many examples to learn from. Why do these national forest funds matter so much? Why are domestic funds so important? Actually, recently, C4ICRAF conducted national forest finance assessments in several countries as part of an EU-funded study. And we found out that national forest funds consistently emerged as part of the top priority financing instruments, including, for example, in countries like Congo, DRC, Guyana, Gabon, and Morocco, among others. However, in most of these situations, NFFs require further operational strengthening and support, especially in terms of governance, transparency, and their ability to mobilize diverse sources of domestic, international, public, and private finance. Despite these challenges, it's very clear their potential is high. They can channel funds effectively at national and local levels, and estimates show that they already manage more than $10 billion globally. One of the key issues is that the literature on national forest funds is very limited. Beyond a few publications from organizations like GIZ or FAO and some academic work, information is still very scarce. There is a strong need to deepen knowledge, share experiences, and better understand how these funds can reach their full potential. In addition to national forest funds, many countries have conservation trust funds, which often take the form of private, non-governmental national foundations. These funds are widely recognized for their high level of trust, thanks to an open governance that includes civil society, the private sector, and government representatives together. There are more than 60 biodiversity and conservation trust funds worldwide, with very well documented best practices. For example, thanks to the Conservation Finance Alliance, but also through networks like the African Network of Environmental Funds, CAFE, and the REDD network in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thanks to these knowledge-sharing alliances and networks, we now dispose of a rich source of learning for these domestic funds design and operationalization. Domestic capitalization mechanisms for these funds are well established and generally rely on two major principles. The first one is the polluter or degrader pays principle, including instruments like carbon taxes, oil taxes, biodiversity offsets, and fines for deforestation or environmental violations. The second one is the beneficiary pays principle, drawing on revenues from sectors that directly benefit from healthy forests, such as wild fees, ecotourism charges, and payments for ecosystem services. Two strong examples, among others, from domestic funds relying on those two principles for their capitalization include the Forest Financing Fund, FONAFIFO, in Costa Rica, which is funded mostly through a mix of an oil tax, revenues, and water fees, but also the Vietnamese National Forest Fund, which capitalizes mainly through contributions from sectors benefiting strongly from forest services, such as hydropower, where healthy upstream forests help avoid sedimentation and maintain energy yields, and ecotourism revenues, among other financing streams for the VNFF. There are also very important international capitalization opportunities for domestic funds, and one of them is clearly REDD+. For example, in Côte d'Ivoire, the National Conservation Trust Fund, the Foundation for Parks and Reserves, is currently managing REDD+ fund. Why so? Because it has been able to create the trust and confidence required by international donors like the World Bank. Another very important opportunity is the accreditation to the Green Climate Fund, GCF accreditation for direct access. And this has been the case already for more than 10 national conservation trust funds that have direct access to the Green Climate Fund. Other global funds like the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility, also support quite significantly conservation trust funds. But what about other global funds? You know, how could they support more proactively national forest funds, conservation trust funds, and other domestic funds? Another key question will be the link between domestic funds and the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, the TFFF. And indeed, as the TFFF provides performance-based payments to countries, domestic funds, national forest funds, conservation trust funds, and so on, could help that these payments actually reaching the right actors, including local communities and indigenous peoples. So with domestic funds, NFX, conservation trust funds, TFFF, could possibly have very strong allies to support fair and effective results at the national and local levels. When looking into the future, domestic funds could actually be strong allies and have a great role to play in the innovations needed for forest finance at scale. One of these roles could be that the domestic funds actually help the design of projects, bankable projects for impact investors, for private investors. They could do so by articulating some forms of technical assistance facilities or project preparation facilities that will help unlock impact finance at scale. Secondly, they could also play a very important role in the coordination between different types of locally led finance solutions. That includes national climate funds, PES funds, and other types of agri funds, rural development funds, and so on. So in this situation, forest funds, domestic forest funds, and conservation trust funds could be strong allies of a landscape approach where forests would be well preserved, conserved, restored, and managed. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a great continuation in this important discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ludwig, he's not here, it was recorded. We go straight to the next presentation. Peria Lemona, the team leader for climate change in CIFO ICRAF.
Thank you, Chris, and also the audience here. Yes, thank you. May I have the presentation? So today I would like to share some of experiences in Indonesia, especially on how the results-based payment and ecological fiscal transfer are being applied, especially at the subnational level, at the province and district level. As mentioned by the previous presenter, there are problems in allocating the funds. There are indeed national funds available for climate and forest, but the issue of allocations as well as how the subnational access those national funds may require another work and also consideration. So result-based payment, as we know, it is payment based on emissions reduction required as the one of the criteria for receiving the payment, and ecological fiscal transfer in this case is also a fiscal mechanism to ensure there are ecological indicators that can be accomplished within a certain jurisdiction. And as we know that there are some issue why subnational level has difficulties in assessing such national level funds. I could see that there are a couple of problems here, like for example, the local government, indeed, they are the one who bear the conservation costs. In this case, for sure that they will be the one that require more fund and support in conducting any conservation actions in their municipalities. And there also we require improved monitoring, transparency, and accountability, especially when we are talking about the forest, right? So any investment indeed that they require impact coming from their financing efforts. And however, in a subnational level, there are limited capacity. Sometimes they have weak governance, they have limited technical expertise, and then also limited support for the MRV system. In addition to that, when we are talking about national to subnational, indeed that there are required responsibility and coordination. On the other hand, there are also equity and inclusion gaps. Yeah, it means that insufficient involvement from the IPLC and local community, while on the other hand, there are also high monitoring and transaction costs. So in Indonesia, there has been regulations on result-based payment, and our government they published just newly published the presidential regulations in 2025, and somehow these regulations it separates NDC and carbon trading, and it also has what's so called the carbon allocations concept. So these enabling proportions of parts of the forest that can be supported using the voluntary carbon market. And hopefully by having these new regulations, the government also would like to speed up the implementations of a carbon economic instrument. And in Indonesia, there are two types of result-based payment. The first one is the national RBP. Yeah, it's based on the national emissions reduction result. And the second one is jurisdictional RBP, where we encourage the subnational level to be more active in reducing and reducing the emissions, and this will be focused more. Oh, it's not yet. Okay, towards the provinces or the subnational that has established this MRV system and governance. So the future outlook of the jurisdictional RBP become one of the priority in our country. Well, in my slide, maybe we can share it later. So we inform you how C4E we support the subnational government in this case the provincial government to map their emission factors as well as to understand which area within their jurisdictions has potential targets for reducing the emission. Yeah, unfortunately I cannot see it. If you can see the map, we somehow provided some scenario models, especially to, for example, to ensure. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Yes, this one. So this is like, for example, one of our work in a province. We support them with evidence-based and spatial analysis to ensure that they will be able to allocate their results-based payment at the provincial level more effectively. Here we help them in calculating the carbon emissions coming from different land use and also ecosystem from the mineral lands and also from the peatland. Yeah? So we are also helping them to make them some scenarios, land use scenarios that somehow will enable them to make some policy and strategy at the provincial level for the financing allocation. Next, please. Yeah, just showing you some of the informations that we provided to the subnational government. Yeah, for example, the informations of how much emissions can be reduced by the peatlands restoration, the impact of the fires, as well as how much area that can be burned in different time. Next, please. So we are also supporting the subnational government to analyze their feasibility for applying the result-based payment. Yeah, there is quite some indicators. We analyze the emission reductions potential, the institutional, the benefits that they can get, and also considering the safeguard. Next, please. Some of the lessons learned for our implementations in Indonesia. somehow the RBP, it will be much more effective when we have clear targeting and beneficiaries as well as geographies. Indeed, that's supported by robust spatial data analysis. And there are requirement to strengthen more the institutional framework at the subnational level, and it requires strong alignment with the local planning framework, including their midterm development plan, regional forestry planning, and also the low carbon emission plan. Next, please. So I would like to quickly inform you another scheme that we tested at the subnational level. This is about the ecological fiscal transfer. As you can see here, the ecological fiscal transfer is a revenue sharing mechanism among government units, to ensure that ecological indicators can be mainstreamed into the development strategy. Next, please. Yeah, you can see that there are a map of where EFT has been applied globally. Next, please. Within Indonesia, there is still no regulations that somehow regulate the EFT at the national level. So mostly of the EFT are being regulated through the willingness of political will from the subnational government. Like, for example, there are a couple of implementations at the subnational level. Next, please. And here we are helping the North Luwu district government to ensure that agroforestry system, as we consider that agroforestry can somehow become the bridging between the conservation and production, to be acknowledged as one of the ecological fiscal indicator at the village level. So here we support the local government to put some indicators of agroforestry restorations as well as conservation as part of them to allocate what's so-called the village fund. Yeah, this links to our other agenda, which is the sustainable commodity on cacao. Yeah, here in this particular district, so the angle is like how to ensure the conservations can be supported by good agricultural practices on cacao, as well as good ecosystem service provided by the cacao agroforestry. Next, please. Yeah, this is one of the example of our work there. All the indicators of the ecological fiscal transfer are being defined together with the local government and also with the private sector as well as the CSO that are having the intentions for the conservations in that district. Yeah, next please. Well, a couple of reflections for what we have done. Similar to what has been mentioned by Ludwig in his previous presentation, that the requirement on the coordinated design components, especially about integrated landscape finance, rather than using only single component when we are discussing about financing allocation. And indeed, that targeting only a single instrument may not be sufficient to effectively achieve a different multiple landscape objective. And then the last one, we encourage that there are concept of integrated landscape finance to ensure that there are innovations on institutional and also financing system. As we know that on the ground, we cannot separate between forest, agriculture, and livestock. They are together in one landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Lei. Very clear. Thank you. Actually, about the last point, the multiple instruments, I think this is something really important. We are doing in our global comparative study on REDD+, we are doing a final effort to provide policy analysis, an analysis of policy instruments in 4 countries. Brazil is one of them, to look exactly at how the different forest policies work together, national forestry, national policies, state policies, municipal policies, policies directed at certain groups of people like indigenous people, punishments, incentives, non-incentives, encouragements. And this is going to be a game changer really, because we are seeing a lot of things clearly now, how they work together, how they hinder each other perhaps, what works better, what works not so well. So I think particularly on finance, mechanisms, this could be an interesting exercise also to do. I want to go now to Bart Hastad from Stanford. Improving tropical forest financing is also a recorded message. Okay, Bunny, shoot.
Hello, I'm Bart Hastad. I'm a professor at Stanford University, Graduate School of Business. I will talk about something I wrote about in a policy brief printed by Stanford and later printed by Harvard, and that regards how tropical forest forever facility can be improved, and the motivation for that is relies on a few weaknesses that I will first mention quite briefly. One of them, the weakness number one, is that the TFFF is basically relying on some kind of a bundling between investments and compensation for forest conservation. So it basically requires those who are donating money to conserve forest to also be willing to invest for the long term in a risky market. So those two things might not necessarily be in the interest of the donors who are paying for conservation. Because the investments are risky, that's in itself a weakness number two. And the scheme is also relying very much on private investors who do not necessarily have the same concern about conserving forest as donor countries might have. So it might also be argued that a weakness with the scheme is that the borrower and also other investors cannot take it for granted that the high-income countries will continue to compensate for forest conservation. That can reduce the incentive to continue with the scheme when you don't necessarily trust that other parties will continue in the future. But what I will emphasize more here is the following two weaknesses. One, weakness number 5, is called impermanence, and that means that conservation of tropical forest is not necessarily permanent because it can be reversed by future governments. And if there is a concern that that might happen, then it can reduce the incentive for donors to pay for conservation today. It can also reduce the current government's incentive to conserve forest if they cannot take it for granted that future governments will continue on this effort. Weakness number 6 is what I call short-sightedness, and that is a phenomena that is important for many political economy problems, and it arises as long as the current government will not necessarily stay in place in the future. Then it means that it can be worried about two things. One is that the policy today might be reversed, as mentioned, and that can reduce the willingness to conserve today, because why conserve if a future government can reverse that decision? Another weakness of this is that the payments that come in the future in return for conservation will be managed by a government who might have different preferences from the government today. Therefore, those future payments will be discounted, and the current government will place a lower weight on the importance of them. So, recommendation to deal with some of these weaknesses is that payments should be loans, but there should be a particular type of loan which are called forest-linked loans. For those loans, the payments for forest conservation should be repaid by the tropical forest countries if and only if deforestation levels in the future exceeds a certain threshold that the countries can agree upon. With this, what I call weakness number 4 is mitigated because more money will come up front rather than later. What I call weakness number 5 is dealt with because the payments are kept only if conservation continues. And that, if you remember, was the impermanence weakness. So that is dealt with because the payments will basically be repaid at an interest rate if a future government is reversing that decision. Because of that cost, the future governments will have a strong incentive to maintain and continue with the conservation effort. The scheme is therefore also robust in the sense that every future government will be incentivized to reduce deforestation and continue with conservation, even if those future governments will have quite different priorities from those today, because that is the only way to reduce the payment of the loan and to reduce the interest rate that you have to pay on that loan. So what I called weakness number 6 is now turned into an asset. So what was that? That was related to the turnover of policymakers. Political turnover means that there is basically a time inconsistency problem here. A government would therefore like to tie the hands of future governments and to make sure that they are going to continue with conservation. But in general, it's very difficult for government to tie the hands of future governments. By accepting a loan that must be repaid if and only if deforestation levels are high, the current government will ensure that future governments will not have an interest in overexploiting the resource, because then it will be expensive in that it must be repaying the loan at a high interest rate. This possibility to tie the hands of future governments is typically beneficial for an incumbent today, and therefore more can be conserved per dollar if payments are given as a forest-linked loan instead of as grants. And this is especially true when the turnover of policy makers is frequent, in the sense that the incumbent today cannot take it for granted that it will stay in power in the future. So similarly, you can think that the so-called debt for nature swaps can be improved upon, because these swaps should ideally not forgive the loan in return for conservation, but it should postpone and forgive the repayment of the loan today in return for conservation. But it should be maintained in the sense that if future deforestation levels increases, then the debt is still there and it must be repaid by a future government. In this way, you will maintain incentives to conserve also for the future. So we can use math and simulations to calculate how valuable it is to conserve forest with a forest-linked loan. To do this, I rely on a model by Giuliano Asensio and Jose Schenkman, Brazilian economist, who have calculated how costly it is to conserve forest with grants such as TFFF. In the same model, I can allow for the turnover of policymakers, and I can show that the cost of conserving forest is between 1/3 and 1/5 of the cost when you conserve with grants. That means that you can conserve 3 to 5 times as much forest for every dollar that you spend if you used forest-linked loans instead of grants or TFFF. So we have seen something like this already, because in 2022 both Chile and Uruguay issued sustainability-linked bonds. These are loans where the interest rate is tied to the performance of some kind of key performance indicators, which measures how successful the borrower is to implement sustainable policies. Chile and Uruguay have shown that it can work, and of course these schemes can be further improved upon and modified so that we can also use them to conserve the world's tropical forests. In the policy brief, I discuss this in more detail and also several of the challenges, and of course I discuss the numerical and the simulation part in detail, especially if you click on online appendix that is available. I would love your comments and questions and concerns, and you can at any time email me at harstad@stanford.edu. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Bart Hastad, for interesting reflections and also some suggestions on how to modify the TFFF. We're going now, I would like to invite the panelists and also Lei to come sit down forward in the front here, please. Okay. So we have heard now a lot about forest finance mechanisms, problems, inherent problems, case studies from the national to the subnational level, and now it's the time to hear from our panels. So let me start with Dirk Nemitz, the FLU lead of the UNFCCC. Dirk, you have an idea of how to make sense of all this.
Well, if I have to make sense of things, I try to go back to the roots of where things are coming from and where we had a good discussion before. And to me, that's the Warsaw Framework for REDD+, which is included in Article 5 of the Paris Agreement 10 years ago and created for transparency in REDD+ activities and in results-based finance, both market-based finance and non-market-based finance. I think there's always often a mix-up on what is covered and what is not covered. But it's also a useful tool, I think, for countries that sometimes gets forgotten to coordinate national efforts and prepare for the requirements of diverse forest finance tools. Because if we go forward, I think the only way for countries to be successful is to combine different tools, but then maintain the transparency on what is happening and where there is double counting or is not double counting, and be able to show this transparently. In the framework, we're first of the REDD+ national strategy, which is a requirement in the UNFCCC. It can be used to take stock of existing mitigation activities in the forest sector, as well as assessing drivers of deforestation, and importantly as a tool to coordinate between different institutions and levels of governance, including local communities and indigenous peoples. Of course, we have all the MRV requirements of a national REDD+ reference level and of REDD+ results, which go through a review process in the UNFCCC. And then we have finally the very important Cancun safeguards. While the implementation is dependent on national circumstances and might differ in each country, national reporting on safeguards information is mandatory in the UNFCCC as well. And they include two important things for any implementation in the forest sector. One is respect for the knowledge and rights of indigenous peoples, and the other one is full and effective participation of relevant stakeholders. And of course, that's up to the national definition, and there's a lot of criticism how it works, but at least it started in most countries, and there's a way to see what is happening. There's a way to see how to compare things in different countries, and there's a way to criticize and improve. Without the Cancun safeguards and without the framework, I think all of this would be very difficult. So I think that countries will do best if they develop the capacity to use this for internal coordination of action and support. And most importantly, this will allow a direct voice for stakeholder participation. But there are also other very direct benefits. One is that once all requirements are fulfilled, countries can apply for results-based payments from the GCF, and nobody can stop that. The GCF has just approved the permanent policy on REDD+ results-based finance. And the second is that for countries that consider working in the carbon markets and working with Article 6.4, it's also a requirement that project-level activities link to a national-level REDD+ framework, to the REDD+ strategy, to the REDD+ reference level, etc. So having that in place will be an enabler, and missing this window of opportunity may cause a delay of up to 2 years for countries to fulfill all of the requirements and to get there again. And I think both are financial sources that are very interesting for countries, and at least partially will benefit will pay for the results, but will also, to some extent, benefit forest-dependent communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So you mentioned market and non-market approaches. We were talking a lot about market approaches. How do you see non-market approaches in this context? Are they going to have? Do they have to grow? Are they growing already? What do you see as needed there?
I mean, both are results-based finance or results-based approaches where the country gets paid after the results are achieved. The non-market-based approaches are without a transfer of any carbon rights, in my understanding, right? And both need the REDD+ framework in place. Non-market-based approaches to me is something like the Green Climate Fund. It's usually not paying for a lot, but if it can be stabilized, I think it pays for enough to keep the institutions running and then be able to look into other options like the market-based approaches. And they are going with a transfer of carbon rights in one way or another. I think it requires a very in-depth assessment for each country to then decide in an informed way what they want to sell and what they want to keep for their own NDC, because NDCs are mandatory for all countries, and what are the requirements under the respective carbon transfer that they are looking at, because there are carbon transfers that would affect the NDC and others that would not affect the NDC.
Thank you very much. Let's move to Daniel. Daniel Muriyasu, he's a professor at Indonesia, at an Indonesian university for agriculture in Bogor, but also the president of the Academy of Sciences in Indonesia. So, and he's also leading a very strong blue carbon work on mangroves and tropical peatlands. So, Daniel, what is your take on the forest finance coming from this angle?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for having me to substitute the injured maybe participants. So in this injury time, I would like to reflect the opinion or observation of the Indonesian Academy of Sciences. So just to give you a little bit of background, the Academy consists of 5 commissions, if you list, including social and cultural science and medical sciences, in addition to science itself. So we have 5. So the Academy has been involved in global undertaking, including the very recent one under the G20. So I was participating in a meeting of G20 for the scientific community called S20 in Rio de Janeiro late last year. And then the second one is the group of academies of the BRICS. So G20 got 20 members and the BRICS got maybe 15 members. And the academy are very active. And in this context of forestry or forest sector, since those 2 meetings were held here in Brazil, we produced a very strong statement and communiques related to the presence of forests. And it was supported by the rest of the members of the S20 and BRICS academies, particularly with regard to the effort to conserve the existing forests. So by underlining the existing one, the academy seems to be very in line with the effort of the global community, including the climate community, regarding protection rather than paying or payment processes. So some individuals are very, I would say, rather critical about payment, investment, finance when you are trying to conserve forests. So the impression, and it is reflected in the statements and communique, is that it sounds like these countries owing tropical forests should be selling quote-unquote forests. Are you going to sell this? Something like that. Especially from those with social science background and those who are working with local community and indigenous people. So in the context of social aspect of forests, the academies trying to respond very recently, since it was only last week, the announcement of the TFFF, which is very much in line with the academy's kind of thought in the last two statement and communiques presented in G20 and BRICS summit. So with that reflection, the issue here is that forests will never ever replace the role of reducing emission from the source. So energy sector should be handled in the first place, while forests will be able to participate that. So the term nature-based solution sometimes should be seen as in a critical way. The nature will never be able to solve the problem. The problem should be solved from the sources, which is the fossil. So forest and fossil is in the hot debate within the academies in many G20 and BRICS countries. So I'm just trying to put this on the table. Perhaps it will be very useful academically to discuss that with the rest of the community. Lastly, with regard to the IPLC and biodiversity, with which the attention of the TFFF, it is very crucial to make a very clear distinction between ownership and stewardship. So if you're working with local community who very often have no title in land ownership, stewardship should be highly regarded. So that's the issue of the TFF related issues that's been watched and looked at very carefully by the academies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Particularly speaking to my heart about the message that has to go out from us, the forest community, to those working on fossil fuels, because sometimes the impression seems to be, if we solve the forest problem, we solve all the problems, but obviously that's not the case. Forests are hugely important for many reasons beyond climate, but if we want to solve the climate change crisis, it has to go, it has to come from fossil. I wanted to, before I go through the panel again, to ask whether somebody in the audience has a comment to make, a question. No? You're satisfied with what you heard so far? Okay, good. Bart, you're listening to us. Any comments from your end after I've also seen the other presentations? Does he hear? Does he hear us? You write him? Yeah, okay. Just a second. Maybe while he collects his thoughts, Lei, you could take the floor.
Yeah, I guess this is also important what Pa Daniel has mentioned.
Yeah, I can hear you. It's a little bit delayed. I enjoy a lot following these presentations, and I learn a lot. I don't have additional comments at this stage, but
Oh, he has no other comments. Okay, I didn't understand it fully. Okay, Lei, back to you.
Yes, I guess it's coming back to Pa Daniel's point on monetizations of ecosystem services and forests. It has been a while. However, also I would like to pick up their points that we need to start from the roots, right? And then why these financing forests are coming up into the surveys? Because actually there is no funds. There is no enough incentive for people to protect forests. Not even incentive, but the efforts to protect a forest itself, the operational cost, right? It's kind of lacking. That's why the issue of PES and then also forest financing come up to the surveys. For sure that to some extent there are some, there's also some debates in evaluations of forests, right? The way to see it as commodifications of monetization, rather than also it requires to really translate the information to the policy and also the strategy, right? Because indeed that we don't want to end up with paying for the nature, but again, it will be important to know some figures when government wants to allocate, especially from the operational perspective. That's how I can see that, because somehow, yeah, indeed that it requires certain resources to ensure something, some efforts are to be maintained for forest conservation as well as restorations. That may be a bit additional.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's wrap this up by giving everybody on the panel 1 minute to say something about what is your most important next step that has to happen in this context of forest finance, in your view. Let's start with Daniel and come backwards.
Yeah, I think we should be very clear in defining or understanding what we mean by nature-based solution. It should not be widely interpreted. I think as we go along all these pavilions, I heard many different interpretation about what NBS means. So I think we should be very clear about that. And I guess this community working on REDD Plus and others related to forest and land use should be making a strong voice about the understanding of NBS. Thank you very much.
Yes, very clear. Thank you. Dirk?
Well, you will probably get tired of me saying that, but let's go back to the Warsaw Framework and Article 5 of the Paris Agreement being very important in the context. It's very versatile to be adapted to national circumstances, and I always like to emphasize it's the only one of its kind agreed at multilateral level. There's no comparable framework for any other sector in the UNFCCC, and there's nothing comparable anywhere else on forests as far as I know. This is important for inclusivity, but also results in many options how different forest-related initiatives can be coordinated together with REDD Plus efforts. And there's no doubt that there are synergies between and overlaps between adaptation, mitigation, and biodiversity in the forest sector. And what I currently see is that there's an increasing effort for countries to monitor all of the different funds and options that come up. There's TFFF, there's carbon markets, there's the Green Climate Fund, there's biodiversity credits, there's direct conservation funding, there's adaptation funding. I could go on and on and on. And all of them are only paying out small amounts. So you spend a lot of time as a country to monitor what's going on and a little time to really receive the money and spend the money. And what we like to do at the UNFCCC is to create a community where countries can directly talk to each other more and learn about benefits of different options and how things can be combined and what is effectively working and what is not. And this is especially important since the global stocktake recognized the importance of enhanced efforts towards halting and reversing deforestation and forest degradation by 2030 in their decision 2 years ago. So we are therefore using the existing REDD Plus web platform to bring users together virtually more strongly. We're starting this year. But we also organize regional and global meetings and create new knowledge products, infographics, and webinars to help countries.
Thank you. Oh, you have more?
Sorry, I had to.
Okay.
And in case you would like to learn more about this, we have a side event on this specifically, because I don't want to take the whole meeting here for this, on Tuesday at 11. And of course, in case of any questions or the need for any support, the FOLU team in the UNFCCC Secretariat is always very happy to help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. The start of a community of practice of forest finance, as it seems. Okay, I think we are in good hands with you.
Yes, maybe just a short message. I would like to see somehow the forest finance communities can see beyond only sourcing. Yeah, so we are always thinking about where we can get more money and for the forest and the biodiversity and the climate. But the other issue is like the governance of the financing itself, right? Because we hear here and there saying like billions or millions funds are coming to the forest, but without forest governance, financing cannot be really implemented on the ground and accessed by the intended beneficiaries.
Yeah, thank you. And Bart, online? Bart, you want to wrap it up from your end? I'm not sure he's hearing us. Mani, you're writing? Okay, just a second. Navigating the cyberspace. Huh? He's muted. You're muted.
Sorry, it's so delayed because I don't hear on Teams, so I will not I will not interfere.
Yeah, it's difficult for him. Yeah.
Okay, so nothing from Bart, unfortunately. I think we had a very good analysis from him. I want to wrap this up here a little bit over time. Thank you for the hardcore audience that really stayed on. Thank you very much for this. I think we heard a lot of different things on forest finance, different approaches, different ideas. There is a lot of diversity out there, and that's a good thing. So more is to come, and we'll be back later.
Yeah,
Thank
just in addition, Chris, so this session will be podcasted, yeah? So it will be podcasted online, so it will be
Podcast.
available for further. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, thanks.